When the Joint History Office released its official post-mortem on the 1983 invasion of Grenada, the report documented a mission that met every political and military benchmark set by the White House. U.S. forces successfully rescued nearly 600 American medical students, dismantled a militant Marxist junta, and eliminated a strategic foothold for the Soviet Union and Cuba in the Caribbean. The entire operation took exactly 9 days. Over 8,000 U.S. troops deployed, resulting in 19 Americans killed in action and 116 wounded. Despite these results, historians focus on Operation Urgent Fury as a case study in systemic friction and command failure. What began as a tightly scoped plan to evacuate civilians rapidly expanded into a multi-branch invasion. That sudden pivot overloaded the military's command architecture. Specifically, the operation exposed severe fractures in Joint Command and Control, or C2, the invisible machinery that is supposed to synchronize the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines into a single fighting force. On the ground in Grenada, the breakdown of this machinery resulted in total communications blackouts, overlapping tactical boundaries, and lethal friendly fire incidents. Understanding the operation requires looking past the strategic win to the internal machinery. While success was likely given the force disparity, the execution exposed institutional flaws that became the primary driver for military reform. The crisis began on October 12th, when a violent coup overthrew the Grenadian government. By the time Washington decided military intervention was necessary, planners had just 96 hours to prepare an invasion. They were working in a tactical intelligence vacuum. Planners had no reliable map of the Grenadian order at all, and they had no idea if the 600 armed Cuban construction workers at the Point Salines airfield would actually fight. The memory of the failed Iranian hostage rescue mission 3 years earlier loomed over the Pentagon. The Joint Chiefs of Staff needed absolute surprise to prevent a hostage situation in Grenada. Then, on October 21st, a media leak revealed that U.S. warships were altering their course toward the island. The element of strategic surprise vanished in an evening news broadcast. To plug the leaks and salvage operational security, JCS Chairman General John Vesey locked down all planning channels. He restricted communication to a special category, or SPECAT, clearance. This decision restricted information flow inside Atlantic Command. Under SPECAT rules, only a handful of officers in J2 intelligence and J3 operations could see the plans or talk. Experts in logistics, medical evacuation, public affairs, and civil administration were structurally locked out. Prioritizing secrecy meant the tactical forces were blind. They landed without a coordinated plan for supplying food, treating casualties, or handling the hundreds of prisoners they were about to capture. The structural problems extended to the command hierarchy itself. In 1983, the U.S. military did not maintain a standing joint task force for the Caribbean region. Without a dedicated regional headquarters, Atlantic Command defaulted to the assets it had on hand. They assigned the Second Fleet, led by Vice Admiral Joseph Metcalfe, to run the entire operation. Admiral Metcalfe commanded Combined Joint Task Force 120, covering Navy Special Operators, Marines, Army Rangers, and the 82nd Airborne. This created a mismatch. The Second Fleet was a blue water staff. They were open ocean experts, lacking experience drawing tactical boundaries for a multi-brigade ground invasion. The plan initially lacked even a basic dividing line between the Army and Marine sectors. General Vesey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, had to personally intervene and manually draw the tactical boundary on the map. Recognizing the danger of a naval staff managing a ground war, the Pentagon applied an 11th-hour patch. They parachuted in Army Major General Norman Schwarzkopf to serve as Admiral Metcalfe's ground operations advisor. Layering multi-brigade ground operations underneath a strictly naval headquarters bypassed standard operating procedures. The moment the plan met enemy contact, the command structure stalled. The baseline objective for D-Day was a coup de main, a sudden, overwhelming strike relying on perfectly synchronized, simultaneous assaults. This map of Grenada illustrates the geography of the initial invasion and the distances between the primary objectives. The plan required Marines and Army Rangers to strike the two main airfields, Pearls on the east coast and Point Salines in the southwest, at exactly 0500 hours. The technical failure began before the troops even reached the drop zone. The lead C-130 transport plane lost its inertial navigation system, forcing the entire aircraft formation to adjust its sequence in midair. That single technical glitch delayed the Point Celine's airdrop by 36 minutes. The Rangers missed their window of darkness and lost tactical surprise. Descending in daylight, the Rangers encountered stiff resistance. The Cuban construction workers at the airfield were heavily armed and organized, pinning the Army forces down. This delay triggered a cascading crisis. North of the airfield, Navy SEALs were trapped by Grenadian armored vehicles at the Governor General's residence. They needed immediate relief, but the Rangers were bogged down and couldn't advance. When Army units tried to call for air support, they hit a catastrophic hardware failure. Their tactical radios physically could not communicate with the Navy ships sitting right offshore, or the Navy aircraft flying directly overhead. To get fire support, Army radio men had to transmit a request 1,500 miles north to Fort Bragg in North Carolina, which then relayed the coordinates via satellite back down to the Navy task force off the Grenadian coast. These communication workarounds proved lethal. On October 27th, near the town of Frequente, an air liaison team called in a strike by Navy A-7 Corsairs to suppress sniper fire. Because the team lacked the Army's specific communications electronic operating instructions, they couldn't clear the target with the 82nd Airborne's fire support element. The Corsairs mistakenly strafed an American command post, wounding 17 soldiers. The friendly fire incidents and stalled advances resulted from service branches operating as independent, incompatible silos. Without a unified system, the different arms of the military often collided with one another instead of the enemy. Faced with a stalled command structure and stiffer than expected resistance, the JCS solved the problem by flooding the zone. They deployed over 8,000 troops against a defending force of roughly 1,000 Grenadians and Cubans. This brute force application of mass was deliberate. Planners knew the ad hoc coordination would cause friction, so they used sheer manpower to absorb the errors in the plan. Once the 82nd Airborne Division arrived to reinforce the Rangers and Marines, the U.S. forces successfully secured and evacuated nearly 600 medical students. The overwhelming numbers allowed U.S. troops to systematically clear the island, eventually capturing and interning over 600 Cuban personnel. Urgent Fury succeeded despite its joint command structure. The military used numerical superiority as an operational crutch to overcome its own planning failures. Back in Washington, the Joint Chiefs of Staff had to answer for the operational chaos. In the post-operation analysis, the Pentagon admitted that isolated planning cells, inflexible command hierarchies, and severe radio incompatibilities had needlessly endangered American troops. The primary institutional takeaway was clear. True joint operations cannot be an ad hoc arrangement forged 96 hours before an invasion. The friction on the ground in Grenada, combined with the tragic bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut that same month, pushed Congress to act. In 1986, lawmakers passed the Goldwater-Nichols Department of Defense Reorganization Act. Urgent Fury exposed the dangers of uncoordinated command. The resulting fallout in Washington forced the integration of the different branches, establishing the unified structure of the modern U.S. military.